So my first question for you is, can fire melt steel beams?
No, it can't. It
Huh?
can't
Huh?
melt steel beams,
So
but
they're right.
it can soften them enough to let them bend.
Hmm.
Like if there was a fire in a room and there's a steel beam on the roof, usually what will happen is the steel beam will sag down,
Hmm.
and that, if you have enough of a fire and enough of the structure is compromised, especially in something like the World Trade Center, where the structure on one floor is supporting the structure of everything above it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you weaken that structure, you've got this huge weight pressing down on these beams and these columns, and enough of them bend, then you're going to eventually get a collapse.
That's what the commission found, and it seems like such a great explanation too for like what you saw, the way that the building collapsed. It seems to really explain what happened. Yet, it's not enough.
Yeah, well, it's because it's actually quite complicated what happened. Like we're talking about the fire melting steel beams, and people say, why did the entire building collapse if the fire was only at the top?
Hmm.
The building below wasn't damaged at all; it was completely undamaged. So what's the explanation for that? And the thing is, the NIST, who did the actual investigation into it, they never really addressed that. They never really addressed in depth why the buildings fell as quickly as they did. What they did say was as soon as the building started to collapse, there was no way of stopping it, and it just fell through itself, basically. But because they didn't do a detailed explanation of that, that's allowed people to come up with conspiracy theories, and they will say, that there had to be some other mechanism on top of the fire to cause this collapse, because they don't understand how it actually collapsed, because it's quite complicated.
So you're saying they note that the commission didn't fully understand how it happened, or the conspiracy theorists don't understand?
No, the commission, from their perspective, it wasn't the commission. That 9/11 commission was actually investigated, like the hijackings and things like that. Not so much the collapses. It was the NIST report that did the investigation. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, or Science and Technology, anyway. So they investigated the collapse up to the point where the top started to fall.
Right.
So they said which core columns were severed when the planes hit, how much did the fires burn, what damage did the fires do, how would they soften columns, how would the building start to sag, the top would start to lean to one side, and at some point there wasn't enough support to keep the upper floors up, and it started to fall. And then they said, at that point, collapse was inevitable, that everything would just collapse. So they didn't detail it.
Yeah.
But they knew. There are a whole bunch of scientists and engineers there. They knew that once the top started to fall, it would just go all the way down to the bottom. It was obvious. But they didn't really explicitly explain what was happening or why it was so fast. And it's a reasonably simple explanation as to why it happened. The building a simple analogy would be a zipper. And that you've got something that's very strong. You can't pull apart a zipper sideways. It's quite strong. But if you just pull a zipper down, each thing comes apart, one tooth at a time. That's kind of what happened with the World Trade Center. The outside of the building is attached to the core of the building via the floors, which are very long. And the floors themselves are only designed to support the people walking around on them and their own weight plus a safety margin. The floors are not structural elements in terms of supporting a vertical load. So if something falls down on the floor, it's very easy for it to strip the floor away from the columns. And you've got all these floors all the way around, linking the core to the outside. And once you've got a falling mass of girders, which weigh hundreds of tons each, falling down from, the first drop was only one floor, so they're falling down, say, 13 feet. The next one is 26. It's falling down 26, so it's accelerated even further. So you can imagine if you drop a 20-ton steel girder on top of something from even just like 30 feet, it's going to pretty much destroy whatever was underneath it. And you've got hundreds of these things, if not thousands of them, falling all at once, and the whole building is disintegrating. It's falling to pieces. It's like dropping a huge bag of boulders on top of it. So it strips away all these floors from the columns. The columns are unsupported. You see the walls, the exterior walls kind of peeling away, almost like a banana peeling away, and these sections falling off. It's because they're not attached to the core anymore, and they've got this huge mass inside.
Yeah.
The core itself is a lot stronger than the exterior walls. It's got these very thick columns. Some of them had like 2-inch thick steel up there and 4 inches thick at the bottom. That actually stands a bit longer. And you see this if you watch the videos carefully. You will see bits of the core remaining whilst the collapse is happening. And you see it poking up through the cloud of dust. Because the floors have been stripped away, the outside walls are falling away, but the core is still kind of standing for a while. It stands for a little bit longer, but eventually, like it succumbs to it. And in both buildings, when the collapse wave of the building, you saw that thing going all the way down the building. When that reached the bottom, half of the core was actually still standing. So the building starts like this, full height. Half of it is still standing, and all the things are stripped away. And you see it in some photos. It's a thing they describe it as the spire. It looks kind of like this spindly spire, but it's really half the height of the building, and it got stripped away, which kind of demonstrates what the mechanism was. So there is actually an explanation for why it fell as fast as it did. It fell through the floors. It didn't fall through the columns. Columns are the strong things. It's really hard to fall through a column, but you fall past the columns, stripping away all the support. The columns are now unsupported from the sides. Very easy to bend something when it's not supported from the sides.
Yeah.
That all collapses. So there's an explanation there. People just don't like to listen to it.
I think it's just it's so spectacular.
Oh yeah.
What happened? That not just one was incredible. 2 was just like overwhelming, right? And so I think just the sheer destruction and chance of it happening like that.
It was
hard to believe.
It was
frankly.
incomprehensible to look at. I remember hearing about it. I was driving to work. I was on the 405. And I'd heard on the radio like someone talking about Washington being attacked, and I thought I'm listening to some play or something. And then I tried changing the channels, and it was the same thing on there. And then someone said a plane flew into the World Trade Center, and I'm on the phone to my wife at the moment whilst this is going on, and it's giving me chills just thinking about it. And then I heard them say one of the towers has collapsed.
Yeah.
And I was like,
how can that be?
it was just.
But then another one.
Yeah, and then
Right.
so I was relating this to my wife. I was like, one of the towers has collapsed.
Yeah.
And then the other one has collapsed.
Yeah.
I had no idea what I was.
Yeah.
It was just your brain can't wrap around it. And I think if you saw it on TV as well, that's going to be
Yeah.
even more so. It's just this, what the heck is going on here?
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
huge explosion-looking thing falling
I
down.
saw the second one hit the building on TV.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I saw that too. So the other aspect of conspiratorial thinking around that is the Building 7 issue, which was a satellite building of the World Trade Center, right? It was a smaller associated building.
It was about half the height of the World Trade Center towers.
Also collapsed.
It did also collapse, yeah. It was about one block to the north. Well, not a block, not a city block. It was one building away from the North Tower. The North Tower is the one with the antenna on.
Did any other buildings collapse?
There were buildings that were essentially so destroyed, you might as well call them collapsed.
But
they didn't.
isn't it so coincidental that the 3 buildings that collapsed now, you're talking about a separate building,
Yeah.
was another World Trade Center building?
Well, the entire complex was essentially World Trade Center. This one was just a bit off to the side. But the reason it collapsed was essentially that the North Tower, Tower 1, fell against it. You had this tower, this 1,300-foot tower, and you just, I think, like 600 feet away, you've got the World Trade Center 7, Building 7, and the entire south face of that building is facing the World Trade Center, which is just like a few hundred feet away, and then there's this enormous collapse with like stuff going everywhere, huge clouds of debris, and there's girders flying off, and a lot of that hit the World Trade Center 7, and it damaged it quite a bit. There was actually like a large chunk taken out of one corner, the southwest corner, and then there was like what looked like a whole line, perhaps one whole column had been destroyed. It's hard to tell with the smoke on that side. Loads and loads of damage to the windows. So it was very easy for fires to get started. There's burning debris coming down, fires to get started throughout the building. Several floors were on fire, at least like 4 or 5 floors were fully engulfed in fire all the way across. Other floors had various fires here and there. You look at the south side of the building, a lot of the times the conspiracy theorists will just show you the north side of the building, because most of the people at that time were on the north looking south, because that's where the safe area was. People went north on the island. So they show you the north side of the building, which looks relatively undamaged.
Right.
But the south side is completely engulfed in smoke. You can't tell how much fire there is, but there's smoke everywhere. And you can see damage. You can see this huge gouge that has been taken out of the corner. And the fires basically were unfought for many hours.
Right. I had heard that firefighters were in Building 7, but they were actually had decided of an act of triage to abandon Building 7 and just let it burn so that they could focus on the main towers.
Yeah, and there were reports throughout the day that people thought it was going to collapse. And people thought that because you could hear the building shifting.
Right.
And some people said they saw like a bulge in the side of the building. And then there's one famous clip of a firefighter saying it's going to collapse. There's no way it couldn't collapse.
So you have all that, but then it's like you just see one dude on the street. Like, you remember Loose Change? That was like, I remember I was in high school watching that, and it was almost like the cool, it was like kind of hip to be a 9/11 conspiracy theorist, because you were just, it made you feel kind of like inside and cool and intelligent but what this documentary shows, and a lot of what you see, is some guy on the street near the tower saying like, "Oh, it sounded like a demolition," or "I saw a demolition," or a couple of first-hand accounts. But that versus all of the official data and footage and the accounts, and that's it. That's all it takes.
It does, yeah. People. The thing is, it didn't sound like a demolition. It didn't look like a demolition for a start. The twin towers being destroyed from the top down.
Right.
There's no demolition using explosives that does that.
They would trigger it at the bottom.
They would do it at the bottom, yeah.
And then it would start from the bottom.
Yeah, and the World Trade Center 7, that looks more like a demolition, that it comes fairly straight down. But the huge difference between that and a regular demolition is that there weren't these loud bangs. If you listen to actual controlled demolitions, it's incredibly loud. Bang, bang, bang.
Yeah.
And then bang, bang, bang. Like even louder. Like the super, super loud bangs, which you can hear from a mile away. And would have been recorded by
but
the
it's like
people doing things.
rhythmic and it's timed, and there's a lot of them.
Yeah. Or they can do it with one at once, but they generally don't. But if there was just one, it would be an enormously loud bang. So you don't hear that. So saying it's like a controlled demolition, it superficially looks like one. The building comes down.
But people who demolish buildings use the same principle of physics.
Yeah, they use gravity.
To have the building destroy itself under gravity, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. It doesn't help also kind of when you look back on the politics surrounding 9/11. It's like all of a sudden we're attacked by Al-Qaeda and the government is like, oh, we need to go into Iraq.
Yeah.
So again, the government, I feel like, fuels this conspiracy by, it doesn't make any sense. What did Iraq do?
Yeah. It was exploited. They exploited the event. Now, they essentially benefited from it in that it furthered their geopolitical goals in some ways. But just because that happened, it doesn't mean that they actually did it.
Sure.
It just means they took advantage
They're
of
like,
it.
oh, great.
Yeah, if you find a wallet on the street, it doesn't mean that you stole the wallet from somebody. It just means you've just found it and you've taken it. It doesn't mean if there was a murder and there was something lying around and you take it, it doesn't mean you killed the guy. You're just exploiting the situation, and that's what's happening with the government.
All right. 9/11. You had tweeted something interesting before we move on. You had tweeted that 9/11 is here. It is on the TV, fading away.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, interesting. 9/11. This is the Google Trends chart, and there was this huge peak back in September 2006, which I think was the time of the NIST report being released for the towers collapse, and so it was like the heyday of people criticizing the government. But then every year you see a peak, and every year pretty much it gets less and less, and now
really nothing,
it's almost nothing. There's probably going to be a peak, a slightly bigger peak this year, because there's the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, this big truther organization. They actually paid the University of Alaska like $340,000 to do a study on Building 7.
They have that much funds to throw around?
Yeah.
I guess people donate.
They're a pretty big organization. I think they take in like $1 million a year, and they've got like
see again, it's
Really?
like
full-time pay there.
Oh, they have full-time employees and everything. But again, we go back to this issue of like, we
Why
have more
focus on
prisoners
this? Yeah.
than anywhere in the world. That's a stat that is undisputable.
Well, I would say you could do both if this was a real thing,
Hmm.
but I don't think it is. I don't think it is a real thing. So I think they're wasting their time.
Well-
I wouldn't like fault people from doing things that they think to be true and pursuing something. But really, after all these years, nothing has really changed. No new evidence has come forward.
That's true.
And we should have been able to figure it out by now.
Oh, yeah.
Instead, we've just got the same bits of nonsense evidence being recycled over and over again. People, saying, "Oh, it fell faster than free fall," or things like that, when they're just ignoring the actual explanation as to why it can fall not faster than free fall, but at near free fall speeds,
right.
accelerations. So you're just getting the same stuff being recycled over and over
How
again.
would it fall faster than free fall? How is that even possible regardless?
It technically is possible. Oops, excuse me. It's possible if something is pulling it in addition to gravity.
But how could you possibly physically pull down the...
Let's say you're standing on top of a cliff
Yeah.
and you're tied to someone, and with a long rope, and they jump off, and a couple of seconds later you jump off. They're already falling faster than you, so the rope gets taut, and then that pulls you down.
Sure, but how could you do that with a building?
In a building, if the interior of the building falls down, the core columns are falling down, then when they hit the lower floors, that can pull down on the outside by the floors kind of pivoting in and pulling down. It's theoretically possible.
But how does that and further their conspiracy
It doesn't.
theory?
It doesn't at all.
That's what I'm confused
Because
about.
if you had explosives, it would fall.
It wouldn't.
Free fall or less.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they would sever everything, and you wouldn't have this complicated mechanism.
I don't understand that
So
claim.
it's not a claim that they make. It's actually a debunker claim that some people have said. Oh, we can. If you measure it carefully, it's a bit greater than free fall.
Interesting.
Therefore, it couldn't have been explosive.
Interesting.
I haven't really verified that, but I know it's certainly a claim that some people make.